The bar was a cacophony of green-clad revelers, a sea of St. Patrick's Day festivities that blended into a blur of noise and movement. And then there was Ethan standing out precisely because he wasn't trying to stand out. No green shirt, no ridiculous leprechaun hat, just a genuine smile and an air of quiet confidence that immediately caught my attention. When he approached me, holding a small bag of weed with a mischievous glint in his eyes, and said, "Here's your pot of gold, leprechaun," I couldn't help but laugh. It was a moment that defied explanation, a spark of connection that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. We talked for hours that night, discovering layers of compatibility that went far beyond surface-level attraction. Ethan was different from anyone I'd ever met. Stable where I was chaotic, patient where I was impulsive, grounded where I was constantly shifting. He saw me in a way no one else ever had, understanding my complexities without judgment, embracing my contradictions with a kind of loving acceptance that both terrified and thrilled me. Our relationship developed naturally, like a carefully cultivated garden. Each day brought new discoveries, new layers of understanding. He wasn't just a partner, he was a sanctuary. When we discussed marriage, it felt like the most organic progression of our journey together. We complemented each other perfectly. My spontaneity balanced his methodical nature. His calm tempered my storms. We talked about building a life, sharing dreams, creating a future that seemed limitless. The world felt full of possibility, and Ethan was at the center of that promise. Little did I know how profoundly I would test the boundaries of that promise, how my own inner demons would threaten to destroy everything we had carefully built. As our wedding day approached, the weight of expectations began to crush me slowly, methodically, like a vice gradually tightening its grip. What should have been a time of excitement became a landscape of overwhelming anxiety. Every decision felt monumental. Flower arrangements, seating charts, family dynamics, guest lists, each choice a potential minefield of potential disappointment. Ethan remained remarkably calm, his steady presence a stark contrast to my escalating internal panic. He had only two simple requests: no wild bachelor or bachelorette parties and a traditional wedding suit. But these modest requirements felt like massive constraints, triggering something rebellious and self-destructive deep within me. I began to feel trapped, not by Ethan specifically, but by the entire concept of marriage, the permanence, the commitment, the potential for vulnerability. My past experiences and deep-seated insecurities started to bubble to the surface. I had always struggled with the idea of maintaining long-term relationships, always finding ways to sabotage good things before they could truly take root. The closer we got to the wedding, the more suffocating the preparations became. Instead of communicating my fears, I internalized them, allowing them to transform into a dangerous cocktail of rebellion and self-destruction. I was desperate to prove to myself that I was still in control, that marriage wouldn't fundamentally alter who I was. The more Ethan tried to support me, the more I pulled away, creating emotional distance as a protective mechanism. My anxiety manifested as a need to test boundaries, to prove my independence, to show that I couldn't be contained or controlled, even if it meant destroying the very thing I claimed to want most. The bachelorette party started innocently enough, a typical gathering of friends, drinks, and shared memories. We were at a crowded bar, the music pulsing, laughter echoing through the space. The initial drinks were casual, nostalgic, a celebration of our friendship and my upcoming marriage. But as the night progressed, something shifted imperceptibly. The alcohol continued flowing, inhibitions dropped, and a sense of reckless abandon took over. When the stripper arrived, initially meant as a joke, a cliché bachelorette party ritual, I was already far beyond rational thinking. My intoxication wasn't just physical, it was an emotional state of disconnection, a deliberate pushing away of responsibility and consequence. The details of that night remain blurry, a purposefully fragmented memory my mind has protected me from fully confronting. Flirtation, proximity, a series of progressively poor decisions blended into a narrative of betrayal. In those moments, I wasn't thinking about Ethan, our relationship, or the life we had built. I was operating from a place of complete detachment, as if watching someone else live my life. The stripper was less a person and more a symbol of my rebellion, my desperate attempt to prove my autonomy, my refusal to be contained by the upcoming marriage. Each drink, each inappropriate interaction was a silent scream against the commitment I both desired and feared. When I eventually ended up in bed with him, it wasn't about passion or attraction. It was about destruction, destroying the carefully constructed facade of who I thought I was, destroying the future Ethan and I had planned, destroying my own sense of self-worth. Waking up the next morning was a descent into a living nightmare. The stranger beside me, the fragmented memories, and the overwhelming sense of guilt crashed over me like a tsunami of consequences. Before I could fully process what had happened, the reality of my actions began to crystallize with brutal clarity. Returning home was like walking into a crime scene of my own making. Ethan's belongings had vanished, clothes removed from the closet, personal items disappeared, photographs erased from walls that now felt like strangers. The emptiness was suffocating, a physical manifestation of the destruction I had caused. His note was devastatingly simple. Hope it was worth it. Those few words became a haunting echo, a constant reminder of my profound betrayal. Ethan had not just left, he had completely excised me from his life. He blocked my number, social media, and even mutual friends who now maintained a cold, uncomfortable silence. My attempts to explain, to beg for forgiveness, were met with absolute, resolute silence. The communication channels I had once taken for granted were now permanently sealed, a digital and emotional restraining order. I descended into a profound depression, a state of perpetual grief for a relationship I had willfully destroyed. Days blurred together in a haze of shame and regret. I stopped eating, barely slept, consumed by an overwhelming sense of self-loathing. Friends reached out, their concern a distant murmur through the fog of my emotional collapse. But I couldn't bear to face anyone, to admit the magnitude of my betrayal, to give voice to the unforgivable act that had shattered everything. Healing was never going to be a linear process. Therapy became my lifeline, a structured approach to understanding the complex web of emotions and behaviors that had led me to this point. My therapist, Karen, was both compassionate and unflinchingly direct. She helped me recognize that my infidelity wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a deeper, more systemic pattern of self-sabotage. Together, we unpacked the layers of my behavior, my deep-seated fear of commitment, my tendency to destroy good things in my life, the underlying belief that I didn't deserve genuine happiness. Writing became a crucial part of my healing process, a way to process emotions and track my personal growth. I began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about taking full responsibility for my actions and committed to becoming a better version of myself. Some days were monumentally difficult. The guilt was a constant companion, a weight that seemed impossible to completely shed. But slowly I started to distinguish between acknowledging my mistake and being perpetually defined by it. I focused on personal growth, understanding my triggers and developing healthier coping mechanisms. 3 years later, I no longer seek to contact Ethan, understanding that he deserves peace and the opportunity to move forward. My journey is about continuous self-improvement, about breaking destructive patterns, and about becoming someone capable of maintaining healthy, meaningful relationships. It's not a story of redemption in the traditional sense, but a testament to the uncomfortable, challenging process of genuine self-reflection and personal transformation. Understanding my pattern of self-sabotage became a crucial turning point in my healing journey. Through intensive therapy, I began to unravel the complex psychological mechanisms that had driven my destructive behaviors. My tendency to push away love and stability wasn't a random occurrence, but a deeply ingrained survival mechanism developed over years of emotional conditioning. Ethan had represented everything I secretly feared and desired: unconditional love, stability, and genuine connection. Instead of embracing this, I had systematically dismantled our relationship, proving to myself that I was unworthy of such profound love. The roots of my behavior stretched back to childhood experiences of abandonment and inconsistent emotional support. I had learned to anticipate rejection, to create chaos before anyone could hurt me first. My infidelity wasn't just a singular act of betrayal, but a culmination of years of self-protective mechanisms. I would consistently create scenarios that would validate my deepest fears that I was unlovable, that good things couldn't last, that happiness was a temporary illusion. Each time something positive entered my life, I would unconsciously devise ways to destroy it. Ethan was the most significant casualty of this internal war. He had been patient, loving, and understanding everything I claimed to want, and yet, I couldn't allow myself to fully receive his love. The therapy sessions became a forensic investigation of my emotional landscape, mapping the intricate connections between my past traumas and present destructive patterns. Karen helped me understand that my actions were not about the physical act of betrayal, but about a profound fear of vulnerability, of being truly seen and potentially rejected. As I delved deeper into self-reflection, I realized I had constructed an elaborate mythology around my own identity, a narrative of perpetual victimhood and inevitable failure. This story had become a self-fulfilling prophecy, guiding my actions and justifying my most destructive impulses. I had always positioned myself as someone who couldn't maintain long-term relationships, who was destined to sabotage good things. This narrative provided a perverse sense of control, allowing me to predict and even orchestrate my own emotional downfall. Ethan had been different. He challenged this carefully constructed mythology simply by being consistently loving and stable. Instead of embracing this opportunity for genuine growth, I had systematically dismantled our relationship to prove my predetermined narrative correct. The process of breaking down this mythology was painful and requires continuous, conscious effort. I had to challenge every internalized belief about my worth, my capacity for love, and my potential for stability. Each time I caught myself falling into familiar patterns of self-sabotage, I had to pause, reflect, and consciously choose a different response. This wasn't about achieving perfection, but about making incremental changes, about developing a new internal dialogue that was compassionate yet accountable. The work was exhausting, requiring a level of emotional honesty I had never before attempted. I began to see my past not as an immutable destiny, but as a series of choices I could now consciously reshape. The consequences of my actions extended far beyond my relationship with Ethan. The betrayal created a complex web of broken trust that impacted our entire social circle. Friends who had celebrated our relationship, who had invested emotional energy in our journey, were now forced to choose sides or awkwardly navigate the emotional fallout. Some mutual friends completely cut contact, their disappointment and judgment palpable. Others tried to maintain a diplomatic neutrality, which often felt more painful than outright rejection. I lost not just a partner but an entire community, a network of relationships I had carefully cultivated over years. The isolation was profound and entirely of my own making. Family members who had welcomed Ethan, who had seen him as a potential future son-in-law, now viewed me with a mixture of disappointment and confusion. My reputation became defined by this single act of betrayal, overshadowing years of previous experiences and relationships. The professional implications were equally significant. In our interconnected social and professional networks, word spread quickly. People I had known for years now viewed me through the lens of this singular mistake. Job opportunities, social interactions, potential romantic relationships, all were tainted by the shadow of my actions. I had to confront the reality that trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. Each interaction became an exercise in managing perceptions, in trying to demonstrate personal growth without appearing defensive or seeking sympathy. Rebuilding myself was not about returning to who I was before the betrayal, but about becoming someone entirely new. This reconstruction was a deliberate, often painful process of identifying my core values, understanding my triggers, and developing healthier emotional responses. I implemented practical strategies to interrupt my self-destructive patterns. Meditation, journaling, and consistent therapy became my tools of transformation. I learned to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of immediately seeking escape or validation. Boundaries became a critical component of my personal growth. I had to learn to set and maintain healthy boundaries with myself and others, a skill I had never truly developed. This meant learning to say no, to recognize my emotional limits, and to communicate my needs clearly and directly. I started small, making commitments to myself and following through, practicing radical honesty in my interactions, and holding myself accountable for my actions. The process was non-linear, filled with setbacks and moments of profound insight. Some days felt like tremendous progress, while others felt like complete regression. But I remained committed to the journey, understanding that personal growth is not about perfection but about consistent effort and genuine intention. The final stage of my journey was perhaps the most challenging, learning to live with uncertainty and extending genuine compassion to myself. I had to accept that I might never fully understand all the reasons behind my betrayal, that some questions would remain unanswered. Ethan would likely never provide the closure I once desperately sought, and I had to make peace with that reality. My healing wasn't contingent on his forgiveness, but on my own capacity for genuine self-reflection and change. I learned to view my past not as a source of permanent shame, but as a complex learning experience. This didn't mean excusing my actions, but understanding them with nuance and compassion. I began to see my younger self not as a villain, but as a wounded individual trying to navigate complex emotional terrain with limited tools. Forgiveness became less about erasing the past and more about creating space for growth. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I moved forward. Each day became an opportunity to demonstrate through actions, not just words, that I was committed to personal transformation. I stopped seeking external validation and started building a sense of self-worth rooted in genuine self-understanding and continuous personal development. My story wasn't about redemption in a traditional sense, but about the ongoing, challenging process of becoming more authentically myself, flaws, mistakes, and potential for growth included. In the end, life is not about perfection, but about the courage to continue growing, even when the path is painful and uncertain. My journey is a testament to the human capacity for change, imperfect, messy, but ultimately hopeful.